The centerpiece on the dining table was a floral arrangement of lilies and white roses. Beautiful, but so fragrant they gave me a headache. Or maybe the headache was from my cousin Haley. For the last 10 minutes she had been holding court, her voice cutting through the gentle clinking of silverware. I never really cared when Haley bragged about her exclusive government job. It was her favorite topic, the one she saved for family dinners where she had a captive audience. She made every gathering her personal stage, loudly mocking my boring desk work, while detailing her own vital importance to national security. Before we dive in, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below, telling me, where in the world are you watching from? I love seeing how far this story travels. She would lean back in her chair, a smirk playing on her lips, and say things like, honestly, I can't even tell you what I do. It's all classified. But let's just say, you all sleep better at night because of people like me. My family would nod, impressed. My aunt would beam with pride. My own mother would give me a soft, pitying look, as if to say, it's okay that you're not special like her. What Haley didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my signature sat at the very top of her project's most recent funding approval sheet. Her entire high-stakes classified world ran on money, and the final decision on that money was made in my quiet, boring office by me. Growing up, our family was a solar system, and Haley was the sun. She was loud, confident, and dazzling. She had a laugh that filled a room, and a personality that demanded attention. Everything she did was celebrated. When she won second place in a local talent show, my aunt threw a party. When she got a B in a calculus class, my uncle declared her a genius. She was praised for her ambition, for her spark, for her ability to light up a room. I was not the sun. I was more like a distant planet, quiet and orbiting on the periphery. I was the one who did my homework without being asked. I was the one who read books in my room while Haley was out with friends. My straight A's were met with a simple, "That's nice, honey." They were expected, not celebrated. They were quiet achievements, and in our family, quiet meant invisible. The dynamic was set early. At family reunions, Haley would be at the center of the adults' table, telling some dramatic story about a boy or a teacher. I would be on the floor with the younger kids, making sure no one choked on a grape. When we got older, the gap between us only widened. She went to a big state school and joined a sorority, majoring in political science. Her stories became about wild parties and important-sounding internships on Capitol Hill. I went to a smaller, more rigorous university on a scholarship and studied finance and logistical analysis. I spent my nights in the library, not at frat houses. No one ever asked about my studies. Finance sounded boring. Logistics sounded like something to do with shipping packages. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't make for a good story at the dinner table. I remember one Christmas, we were both home from college. Haley was talking about an internship she had with a congressman. "It's all about networking, you know," she said, swirling the wine in her glass. "It's not what you know, it's who you know." Then she looked over at me, where I was sitting quietly on the couch. She leaned across the table, patted my hand with a condescending sweetness, and said, "Hang in there, Mads. Not everyone can aim high. The world needs people to do the boring stuff too." My father chuckled. "She's got you there, Maddie." I didn't say anything. I just retreated further into myself. Her words didn't make me feel angry. They made me feel tired. I was tired of trying to explain that my quiet work had its own ambition. I was tired of being the family's designated background character. So I just stopped trying. I focused on my work. I got my degree, then my master's. I took a junior analyst position at a small firm, then a better one at a larger company. I worked long nights and weekends, climbing a career ladder that no one in my family bothered to ask about. In their eyes, I was just Madison, the quiet one with the boring desk job, and I let them believe it. The event that set everything in motion was my parents' 35th anniversary dinner. They had rented out a private room at a nice Italian restaurant downtown. The lights were low, the wine was flowing, and for the first hour, things were peaceful. I was seated between my father and my uncle, listening to them talk about golf. It was pleasant, normal. Then Haley arrived. She was 45 minutes late, making an entrance that caused the entire table to fall silent. She wore a sharp navy blue suit with pointed heels that clicked loudly on the hardwood floor. Her hair was pulled back in a severe professional bun. She looked less like she was coming to a family dinner, and more like she was about to brief the president. "Sorry I'm late," she announced to the room, not sounding sorry at all. "Got held up on a conference call. You know how it is, national security doesn't take a night off." My aunt rushed to hug her. "Oh, you poor thing, you work too hard." Haley waved a dismissive hand. "It's what I signed up for." She took her seat directly across from me, and the spotlight of the evening immediately shifted to her. For the next 20 minutes, she launched into a monologue about her work. It was all vague but impressive-sounding jargon. She talked about interagency cooperation, threat assessments, and securing assets. She couldn't give details, of course. It was all top secret. "The pressure is immense," she said, taking a large sip of red wine. "Every decision I make has consequences. We're talking about billions of dollars in military hardware, state-of-the-art technology, the kind of stuff that keeps our country safe." Everyone at the table was captivated. My mother looked at me and smiled that same sad smile. I just smiled back and sipped my own wine. I didn't have any stories about national security. My day had been spent reviewing quarterly budget reports and cross-referencing supply chain logistics. It was important, methodical work, but it didn't sound good in a speech. Then, Haley's eyes landed on me. The smirk I knew so well appeared on her face. "Mads, you work in an office, right? You probably get it. The paperwork, the bureaucracy. It's a killer." I nodded slowly. "There's a lot of paperwork, yes." She laughed, a loud, theatrical sound. "I bet. You know, it's funny. The building where I work has insane security protocols. You need top-level clearance just to get in the elevator." She leaned forward, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret with the whole table. "I'm not even joking. You probably don't even have the clearance to clean the floors in my office." A wave of laughter went around the table. My dad, my uncle, even my own mother chuckled. It was a joke, of course. It was just Haley being Haley. But it stung. It stung because it wasn't just a joke. It was what she and all of them truly believed. That I was small. That my world was a tiny, insignificant box compared to her grand, important one. I didn't defend myself. I didn't correct her. I just took another sip of my wine, held her gaze, and gave her a small, tight smile. I let her have her moment. I let them all laugh. Inside, though, something shifted. The exhaustion I had felt for years was replaced by a cold, quiet resolve. The hidden truth was simple, but it was mine. 6 months before that dinner, I had been promoted. I wasn't just a financial analyst anymore. I was the Deputy Director of Defense Allocations at a company called Ares Defense Solutions. Ares was not a small firm. It was one of the largest private defense contractors in the country. We designed and manufactured everything from advanced communication systems to armored vehicle components. The government didn't build its own technology. It paid companies like mine to do it. And when a government department, like the one Haley worked for, wanted to launch a new project, they needed equipment. They needed our equipment. My job, my boring desk work, was to oversee the funding and allocation for these projects. Government agencies would submit proposals, detailing their needs and their budgets. These proposals would eventually land on my desk. My team and I would vet them, analyze the costs, and ensure the numbers made sense. We held the purse strings. Every penny a department spent on our technology, every piece of equipment they ordered, every project they launched required approval from my office before the funds were released. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Haley worked for the government, a job that sounded powerful and important. I worked for a private contractor, a job that sounded like boring corporate work. But in the strange, interconnected world of defense spending, my private sector signature carried more weight than her government title. She was a client, a very demanding, very important client, but a client nonetheless, and I was the one who decided if her requests were approved. I never told my family about the promotion. I never corrected Haley's assumptions. Why would I? It wouldn't have mattered. My title, Deputy Director, didn't have the same mysterious glamour as her classified government work. Explaining the power dynamics of defense contracting would have been met with blank stares. It was easier to just let them think I was plugging away at a spreadsheet somewhere, insignificant and harmless. It was better that way. It allowed me to move through the world and through my family, unbothered. I had built a successful, powerful career in the quiet spaces they never bothered to look. The opportunity arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was a grey, overcast day, and I was on my second cup of coffee, reviewing a preliminary budget for a naval communications upgrade. An email notification popped up on my screen. The subject line was standard: Project Nightingale, Phase 2 funding request. I clicked it open. My eyes scanned the attached documents, project outlines, cost-benefit analyses, and a detailed budget breakdown. Project Nightingale was a big one, a multi-year initiative to develop a new generation of surveillance drones. It was high priority, and Haley had been boasting about her leadership role on it for weeks. At our last family get-together, she had called it a game changer. I scrolled down to the final page of the funding request, the official submission form, and there it was, under Department Lead. Haley E. Clark. The request was for $42 million. It was for the second phase of the project, covering everything from component acquisition to preliminary field testing. Her name was stamped all over the file. Her digital signature was on every page. This was her baby, the project that was going to define her career. And the request for the money she needed to make it happen was sitting on my desk. My first instinct was purely professional. I started reading through the numbers, my mind automatically flagging lines that seemed high. The allocation for consulting fees was generous. The budget for travel and expenses seemed inflated. These were normal things, the kind of budgetary padding you see in almost every proposal. Under normal circumstances, I would have my team trim the fat, send it back with a few notes, and approve it within the week. Standard procedure. But I paused. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly in the quiet of my office. I looked at her name on the screen. Haley E. Clark. I thought about the anniversary dinner. I pictured her smug face, heard her condescending laugh. You probably don't even have the clearance to clean the floors in my office. A wave of something dark and tempting washed over me. I could kill the project with a single email. I could flag it for redundancy or budgetary non-compliance. I could bury it in so much red tape it would never see the light of day. I could destroy the single most important thing in her professional life, and she would never even know it was me. She would blame some nameless, faceless bureaucrat. The thought was intoxicating. It was a flash of raw, vengeful power. But then, just as quickly, the feeling passed. That wasn't who I was. I hadn't gotten to my position by being petty or vindictive. I had gotten there by being smart, careful, and better than everyone else. Revenge was loud and messy. I preferred quiet efficiency. I could have approved it instantly. I could have signed off on the inflated budget and sent it on its way, giving her an easy win. But that didn't feel right either, so I chose a third option. I didn't deny it. I didn't approve it. I just paused. I took control. Instead of hitting the approve or deny button, I opened a new email. I flagged the Project Nightingale budget for further verification. It was a neutral, professional term that could mean anything from a minor typo to a major problem. It put an immediate hold on the entire process. Next, I scheduled a meeting. I sent an invitation to the necessary department heads on the government side, the project liaisons, and the lead technical officer from my own company. The purpose of the meeting was a budgetary review for Project Nightingale. It was a high-level meeting, the kind people didn't ignore, and as the primary stakeholder from the department, Haley was required to attend. The email that went out to her and her team was from my office, but not from me directly. It was a standard administrative notification. It simply stated that a finance official from Ares Defense Solutions required a meeting to discuss certain discrepancies in the funding request. She was told to be prepared to defend her numbers and justify every line item. To her, the person who had summoned her would be a nameless, faceless finance official. Some boring numbers guy she would have to charm or intimidate to get what she wanted. She would have no idea that the person on the other side of that conference table was me. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I didn't dig for dirt or look for ways to embarrass her. I did my job. I meticulously went through every single page of her proposal. I cross-referenced costs with market rates. I analyzed the projected timelines against our production capacity. I prepared a list of calm, professional, and incredibly difficult questions. I wasn't planning to get revenge. I was planning to do my job and to do it better than anyone else. I was going to hold her to the same high standard I held everyone else to. For the first time in our lives, she was going to have to face me on my terms, in my world. And in my world, confidence and charm didn't matter, only the numbers did. A strange sense of calm settled over me. This wasn't about family. This wasn't about years of feeling invisible. This was about a $42 million funding request. It was just business, quiet, simple, and completely within my control. The conference room was on the 34th floor, encased in glass with a panoramic view of the city. It was my territory. I arrived 15 minutes early, setting my leather-bound notebook and a pen neatly in front of my chair at the head of the table. My nameplate was already there, a simple block of polished aluminum engraved with 2 lines. Madison Clark, Deputy Director, Defense Allocations. The other attendees filed in. A stern-faced general, a few serious-looking men and women in suits. They all knew me. We had worked together for years. They nodded respectfully as they took their seats. The atmosphere was quiet, professional, and tense. Meetings like this weren't called over minor issues. At exactly 10 o'clock a.m., the door opened again. Haley walked in, followed by a younger male aide who was carrying a briefcase. She was in her element, smiling a broad, confident smile. She looked around the room, her eyes scanning the powerful people at the table, ready to perform. Then her eyes met mine. Her smile didn't just vanish, it froze. It was like watching a film suddenly stop on a single frame. Her expression was a mixture of utter confusion and dawning horror. Her eyes darted from my face down to the nameplate on the table, then back to my face. She saw my badge, clipped to the pocket of my blazer. She read my name, then my title, then she read it again. The color drained from her face. The confident woman who had walked in just seconds before seemed to shrink. Her shoulders slumped. The aide behind her bumped into her, not realizing she had stopped dead in her tracks. I didn't smile. I didn't show any emotion at all. I simply gestured to the empty chair directly across from me. "Ms. Clark," I said, my voice calm and even. It echoed slightly in the silent room. "Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." She moved stiffly, like a robot, and sat down. She couldn't seem to look away from me. The swagger was gone, replaced by a wide-eyed, deer-in-the-headlights stare. Her aide took the seat next to her, opening his briefcase to pull out files, oblivious to the personal drama unfolding. I waited for everyone to settle. Then, I opened her file, the one I had studied for 2 days. I didn't look up at her. I looked down at the papers in front of me. My tone was cool, professional and detached. "Let's discuss your numbers, Ms. Clark." For the next hour, I was in complete control. I went through her budget line by line, my voice never rising, my questions pointed and precise. "On page 4, you've allocated $2.8 million for third-party logistical consulting. Can you specify which firms you consulted for this estimate? The numbers seem high compared to industry benchmarks." Haley's voice trembled when she tried to answer. We used a standard projection model." She stumbled over her words, unable to provide a concrete answer. She kept looking at me, as if hoping to see a flicker of the cousin she knew, the quiet Madison she could easily dismiss. But that person wasn't in the room. I just nodded and made a note. "We'll need a detailed breakdown of those projected costs before we can move forward on this item." I moved on. "The travel budget. You've budgeted for 16 international trips for a team of 8. Given that Phase 2 is primarily domestic development, can you justify this expense?" Her aide tried to jump in, but the general at the table cut him off. "Let Ms. Clark answer the question." All eyes were on Haley. She was no longer the star of the show. She was a witness on the stand, and she was faltering. The confidence she wore like armor had been stripped away, leaving her exposed and uncertain. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the one holding the room's attention. I was. They weren't looking at her as a charismatic leader, they were looking at me, the person with the authority, the person asking the questions that mattered. She stammered something about global supply chains and partner outreach. It was weak, and everyone in the room knew it. I didn't press her. I didn't need to humiliate her. The situation itself was doing that far more effectively than I ever could. I just made another note in my notebook. When we reached the end of the review, I closed the file. The room was silent. Haley stared at the polished surface of the table, her face pale. I looked around at the other members of the meeting. "Thank you all for your time. My office will make the necessary adjustments to the budget based on this review." I then looked directly at Haley, my expression unreadable. "The core of the project is sound. The funding is approved." A tiny sigh of relief escaped her lips. I continued, my voice level. "However, I will be sending a quiet note to your supervisor regarding some of the overinflated ancillary costs in this proposal. In the future, I recommend you submit a budget that is more reflective of the project's actual needs." It was a final professional blow. I had given her what she wanted, but I had also made it clear that she was on notice. I had exposed her carelessness to her superiors, not with anger or emotion, but with quiet, undeniable facts. "This meeting is adjourned," I said. Everyone stood up. The general came over and shook my hand. "Good work, Madison. That's why we value your oversight." Haley didn't move. She just sat there, staring at nothing, until her aide gently tapped her on the shoulder. She had gotten her money, but she had lost something far more valuable: her power. The next family dinner was 2 weeks later, at my aunt's house. The occasion was a birthday for one of the younger cousins. I walked in expecting the usual dynamic, the usual performance from Haley. But the house was different. It was quiet. Haley was already there, sitting on a couch in the corner of the living room. She was nursing a glass of water. She wasn't wearing a power suit. She was in a simple sweater and jeans. She wasn't holding court. She wasn't telling stories. She was just sitting there, watching the kids play. When I walked in, her eyes met mine for a brief second. There was no smirk, no condescension. There was just a flicker of something I couldn't quite read. Fear, maybe, or a grudging respect. Then she looked away. Throughout the entire dinner, she barely spoke. When someone asked her about her job, she just shrugged. "It's fine," she said. "Lots of paperwork." No one mocked me. No one gave me a pitying look. The spotlight Haley had occupied for so long was empty, and in its absence, the conversation became more balanced. My uncle asked me about my work. I told him I was busy. but that things were going well. It was a simple, honest answer. I didn't need to brag. I didn't need to perform. Haley and I never spoke about the meeting. We never acknowledged what had happened. There was no dramatic confrontation, no tearful apology. There was no need. The message had been delivered, not in words, but in the cold, hard reality of a glass-walled conference room. She knew who I was now. She knew what I was capable of. As I drove home that night, I didn't feel a surge of triumph or a thrill of victory. I just felt a deep, profound sense of peace. I hadn't needed to raise my voice. I hadn't needed to expose her to the family or demand an apology. I had won the war by simply doing my job and doing it well. My power wasn't in being loud, it was in being competent. It was in being the quiet one who understood how the world really worked. Silence, I realized, was the sweetest victory of all. Ever had someone underestimate you until they learned the truth? Drop your story in the comments and subscribe for more tales where the quiet one holds all the power.